I'm Alan Johnson, KU2Y, and this is the CubeSat Simulator Assembly Video, Step 8, Part 1. We're going to stack the boards. So we have the 3 custom boards plus the Pi Zero, the battery board, the main board, and the solar board. And in addition, we're going to need some hardware pieces in order to stack them. So let's get started. We'll begin with the Pi Zero that has the Pi camera plugged in and also the on-the-go micro USB cable plugged into the USB port with the USB sound card plugged in. And also it's got the micro SD card, which has been programmed. Okay, so for this, we need 2 11mm standoffs and 2 6mm standoffs. And I'm going to put them on here. I'm going to put the 6mm on the bottom and screw the 11mm here on top. And I'm just going to do them finger tight. You can nip them up with pliers if you want to, but I don't recommend tightening them like they're bolts on an engine or something. It's really not necessary. Okay, so that's our first layer of standoffs here on the Pi Zero. Next, we're going to stack the battery board on top. And for that, we need 2 18mm standoffs that are going to go underneath it here. And then we need 4 of these 23mm standoffs, which will go on top. So start by flipping the battery board upside down. And then if I flip the Pi Zero upside down, and now I can plug it in, line up the pins here, and then gently push it in so it's in all the way. So that looks good. So I'm going to flip this back around again. All right, so I'm going to put this 18mm here underneath the board, and then I'm going to put the 23mm through the board hole and screw it in like that. Do the same on this side. And when you do that, the board stack should sit flat. It shouldn't be sitting at an angle or anything. That's good. And then I can also take these 23mm standoffs and screw them in here and screw them in there. Okay. So that's completed this level of standoffs. Next, we're going to do the main board. We're going to stack it on top, and we're going to need to use an extra stacking GPIO header. That's because if we plugged it in without it, you see the pins do not make contact. We need this extra space because of the height of the batteries. So I'm going to turn the main board upside down. I'm going to take my stacking GPIO header and I'm going to plug it in. I'm just going to line it up carefully here. Make sure none of the pins are bent, and then I'm just going to gently push it down like that. Okay. So now we are ready to stack it on top. So I'm just going to line it up here. Make sure the pins are lined up, that none of them are missing. And then I'm going to push down. And once that's in there all the way, the board should be pretty much touching the standoffs on all these corners, and it should be roughly straight, roughly parallel with the other board. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm using the SMA antennas. So I'm going to plug in the two SMA coax connectors here. I'm going to have one here at the top and one at the bottom for the two antennas. And then I'm also going to need 4 of these 23mm standoffs in order to secure it. So let's do that. Put the coax in here, tighten it. Again, I'm just tightening it by hand. No need to really wrench it on there. Okay, so there's the coax ready to attach the antennas. And now I can do the 23mm standoffs here and put them on each of the 4 corners. Okay. That looks good. All right, and so now we have these boards. So now we can take this 3.5mm connector. It's plugged into the main board here, and the USB sound card here, plugged into the on-the-go cable. And I'm going to plug it into the pink one. Unfortunately, it's not labeled, but it is pink. The headphones one is green, which is not the one we want. We want to plug it in to pink there. Okay. So that is connected. And then finally, we're going to add the solar board on top. And again, because of the height of some of the elements here, we need to use a stacking GPIO header. So I'm going to flip the solar board upside down, and then I'm going to carefully plug the stacking GPIO header in, line up all the pins, and then I'm going to push it nice and straight. Okay, that is ready to go. And then I'm going to place it on here. Down here, carefully make sure all the pins are in, everything is straight, and then I will push it down. So that looks pretty good. And again, all 3 boards should be parallel, and the distance between them should be the same there. So that looks good. Now, having done that, we can plug in the JST jumpers here. So there's 2 of those. So first is the one here that's on the bottom board, on the battery board. And we want to plug that into the solar board where it says battery. There we go. All the rest of these connectors are for the solar panels, but these 2 over here on the lower right-hand side are for the power. And then there's another JST jumper here that was already plugged into the solar board. And I'm going to plug that in to the middle board here, the main board, and the one on the right is labeled solar. So that's the one I'm going to plug it in and push that down. So there you can see the one JST from the battery board goes up here to the solar board, and then the one from the solar board goes to the main board. Now, It actually doesn't matter which of these two, left and right here and left and right, you use because they're all wired together. But if you want to follow the labels, this is the correct way for that. Okay, so those are all plugged in, and eventually the USB sound card, it's going to get plugged in like this when it's all stacked up. But for now, it can sit here, and also the camera is also going to come out this side here. We'll fix that when we're about to stack it. Okay, and then the final thing is we need the 4 screws here and our Phillips screwdriver here, and that will secure them on and complete the board stack here. Okay, so there we have it. Here is the board stack complete. And sometimes it's a good idea to give it a test at this point. So if we wanted to power it up just to make sure everything was good, that nothing got unplugged, something. So I would take out the remove before flight switch here and look for signs of life here. You can see the Pi 0 coming to life here. You can see the Pico blinking. We see the green power LED on and the blue one there flashing. So that looks good. And if I want to shut it down here, I'm going to press and hold the push button here till I go through the whole sequence of 5 modes. And then once it starts flashing slowly, that's when I will release it. There it goes. So now I can release it. And in a few seconds, it will shut down. And there we go. And now I can put the remove before flight switch back in. And so we've completed the first part of step 8. Next, we're going to mount this on the frame.